Hi, it's Dr. Lori. I'm here to see if you can pick the most valuable. So you're at that thrift store, or maybe you're at an antique shop, or yard sale, flea market, your storage locker, your grandmother's basement. Do you pick the most valuable? I'm going to teach you how to do it. So I'm going to go through all different types of objects, and we're going to talk about what you would look for in these different types of objects. Objects you'd find at the thrift store, or the antique mall, or flea markets, yard sales. Okay, here we go. This first object is a lapis lazuli necklace. Now, it is set in a sterling silver setting. Now, here's a couple of things I want you to think about with respect to this. The sterling silver is going to be marked. Lapis is a pretty identifiable, easily identifiable blue stone that lots of you have seen many times. So look for those things. When you're looking at this particular necklace, I want you to think about how it was made. So anything you see, particularly with jewelry, costume or of course fine jewelry, think about how did they make it. So with this particular piece, I want you to look at the pieces. And you're going, well, what pieces, Dr. Lori? It's one big necklace. Well, actually, it's component parts. And those component parts, kind of a curve of the silver, and then each teardrop lapis lazuli stone is set in. There are multiples of those particular curved part, and then with a little loop, with like a little loop, basically they put them together. So you have 5 or 6 of these component parts. Well, the way they made that is they made each of the components over and over and over again. And as you know, every time when you make something, it is better and faster, more cost effective and more labor effective for you to just make the same thing over and over. When you switch tasks, you slow down. So that's what they're doing here. You can see again, those little sort of smiley faces, right? Those little curves, and then each of the teardrops, and then again and again and again, and then they just unite them with those little loops. The construction of this is very indicative of the 1960s, a time period when you see a lot of mass production happening. So that relates to this particular piece of jewelry, and it actually helps you to identify the time period as well. If you actually had one big piece of jewelry, it would have taken more time and been more expensive to make that one all of one. But the parts actually lower the cost. Value on this vintage piece of jewelry, sterling silver with the lapis lazuli teardrop stones, $250. This next piece is a toy. Now you know toys, very emotional market. This particular piece is a toy that's made in Japan. Now, Japanese toys were all the rage after World War II, and particularly into the mid-century modern time period. If you look at this toy and you're thinking about materials and you're thinking about how it was made, of course, it's a little bunny rabbit mother walking her little bunny rabbit baby in the bassinet with the mobile, sort of the little umbrella mobile above its head. All plastic. Okay, so inexpensive materials, quick to make during the time period after World War II when we're rebuilding Japan, right? So you're seeing, of course, the occupation time period and about 10 to 15 years after. So these pieces are mass produced in large numbers. Many, many kids at Easter would get one of these in post-war America, made in, of course, Japan. So this particular plastic toys and others like it's going to have a low value, about $15. This next piece relates to history too, and of course, it's the children of President John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. These particular figurines are not unlike Hummel figurines from Germany. And they were so popular, Hummel figurines were, after 1945 and into the 1950s and 60s, that it was thought in America that we could make our own figurines of children who were beloved as well. This is Caroline and John, of course, the young children of President Kennedy. Now, President Kennedy is assassinated in November of 1963, and you see John here, his young son, John Fitzgerald Kennedy Jr., giving that salute, the salute that he actually gave as the hearse with his father's body drove by at, of course, the ceremonies and the funeral procession in Washington at that particular time. So you're seeing this particular image, this figurine image of John and his sister Caroline. Caroline was oftentimes seen in that blue overcoat. And the blue overcoat, of course, became indicative of the young girl's wardrobe, a wardrobe that was made very famous by her mother. She was a style icon, of course, Jacqueline Kennedy. These particular figurines were made in 1963, and they were made, in fact, in Cleveland, Ohio. They're marked on the bottom with the company name, Inarco, and Inarco figurines like these are collectible. They're kind of the American ceramics, if you will. Value on these figurines, about $50 a piece. If you had the set's worth more. John, and Caroline together will add 10% to that value. Okay. The next piece is perfume. It's a perfume bottle. I like perfume bottles. I think they're beautiful from all different eras. This particular one is an enamel gilt, that's gold overlay, right? Atomizer perfume bottle from about the 1930s to the 1940s. Perfume bottles are really hot. People are collecting perfume bottles and reselling them. They're also collecting perfume inside and reselling it in vials. This perfume bottle is rather large. It doesn't have the squeezing air element of the atomizer. Sometimes those get lost over time, but you can see that the bottle itself was really quite a work of art that would sit on a vanity table or would sit on a dressing table for women in the 1930s and 40s. Do you know the value of it? It's worth $300, and it has to do with the quality of the crystal and, of course, the perfume itself. The maker's names do matter when you're looking for perfume bottles. If it's full, it's worth more typically. This one is empty. Value on it, $300. The next piece is a piece that maybe folks would be more familiar with if you're music aficionados. This particular piece is a Michael Jackson vinyl record. Epic Records produced this particular record with Quincy Jones, the famous, of course, producer Quincy Jones. This from 1982, in this particular sixth studio album record by Michael Jackson, Thriller, and you all know it. It was for a very long time the highest, of course. It sold the most records worldwide for years and years and years, and now only the Greatest Hits by the Eagles has surpassed Thriller with that particular distinction. But what I want you to look for when you're looking at vintage vinyl, because vinyl is big now, is I want you to look for the artwork on the cover. I want you to look whether or not it's actually an album that opens. I want you to look at the insert, right? The insert might have lyrics on it or other artwork on it. And I want you to take the record out. If it's encased in plastic and has never been played, that's great for value. If not, and this particular example has been played, so it's a typical one that someone used, if you take out the vinyl record and there are no scratches, that's going to help value as well. Those scratches from the turntable needles oftentimes are a big, big sign of significant damage. So be aware of that. The more you handle record albums, of course, and where you store them will impact condition and value too. This particular example is worth $75. It had a spike in 2009 at the time period, of course, of Michael Jackson's death. So remember, you see collectibles spike in the market and come up and down. Are you thinking about which one's the most valuable? Here's another piece. American Brilliant Cut Glass. This particular piece is an American Brilliant Cut Glass piece. Now, American Brilliant Cut Glass had a very, very, very high market for a long time and then saw a basic leveling off in the early years of the 21st century. Up until the late 1990s, you saw a lot of people still collecting American Brilliant Cut Glass. But in fact, by the turn of the 21st century, you saw it level off. And that market change really is important. By about 2025, I predict you're going to see American Brilliant Cut Glass come right back up. Why? Because of that is the 100th year revival of the making of American Brilliant Cut Glass. So a lot of it was made in the 1920s to 1925 time period, and when we hit 2025, you're going to see it spike again. So if you've got it, hold on to it now. This particular piece is identified by its maker and by the patterns. So you have to start to learn the patterns. So if you're in the thrift store, if you're looking for valuable pieces, look at the patterns. The more intricate the patterns and the sharper the cuts. So put your thumb in there, put your fingers in there and touch it. See how sharp the cuts are, and be careful to make sure that if you have a sawtooth pattern right around the rim, that there are no breakage, there's no chips or cracks in the piece. That's important as well. Value on this piece, about $175. It's about 8.5 inches in diameter. Size matters. You got to look at the size of these bowls. If they're very, very small, of course, they're going to have a different value than, of course, the bigger ones. This next piece is a piece you might all recognize. It's a Beanie Baby. There's a lot of misinformation about Beanie Babies online, a lot. Even the people who you think, oh, those people must be the experts, so much misinformation. There's lots of criteria you have to look at when you're evaluating Beanie Babies. Numbers are all over the map, and there are collectors who are paying a lot of money for your Beanie Babies, and there are people who are putting up Beanie Babies that are of inferior quality and saying they're worth a lot, saying they're similar when they're not. So you look for lots of things. You have to look for tag consistency. You have to look for the dates they were made. You have to look for materials used. You have to look for stamps. You have to also look for the specific names, which ones were more popular, which characters or which dolls were more popular. Also look for groups, the original 9, the Peace Bear, the iguanas, the birds, whatever thematic groups there are. There's also the ones that are iridescent, like Mystic and Magic and Halo and such. So there's lots of things to look for, and there's lots of things you have to think about. This is Patti the Platypus. She's in good condition. That has to do with pellets, for example. And this particular example is worth $55. She's one of the original 9. But she is not the first 9 to come out. So that's important too. Her group is important. Finials on chairs. That's the next topic, right? This particular piece has to do with, of course, furniture. Furniture is really popular. Lots of people like to collect it. Lots of people think, it's not really worth that much. Functional furniture of good design from particular time periods, like the 1870s to 1890s, the late 19th century, are going to be important. I want you to look at a couple of things. Look at the finial. Those are the elements at the top of the chair, right? The rail across the back, right? The spindles, the rail across the back is called the crest rail. The spindles, in fact, are also important if you have a spindle back chair. And the seat is the most important part of a chair, right? So the seat is important too. Notice whether it's caned, notice whether it's a rush seat, or maybe it's a piece of another material. Maybe it's a piece of another material that has been utilized for the middle of the chair. Some are hard-bottomed chairs, so the whole chair is made of wood, called hard bottom. Those are types of elements that you want to look for when you're looking at chairs and evaluating them. This particular chair is late 19th century. Again, you want to know whether it's turned on a lathe, right? Or whether it is hand carved. This particular piece turned on a lathe. Value on this chair, $150 from the late 1880s. This piece is a piece of Belleek. And Belleek is Paris in China, very famous, of course, made in Ireland. And this particular piece has a lot of clues. Here are some of the clues for you to identify a good piece of Belleek. First of all, the shamrocks are one of the clues to Belleek, but not every piece of Belleek has shamrocks on it. This one happens to have shamrocks, and it also has a nice applied ornamental handle on this particular pitcher. When you turn the pitcher over and you look at the underside of the base, the bottom of it will show you a mark. This is a green mark, and the green mark indicates that this particular piece was made from 1965 to 1980. What's the kicker? The telltale sign on this green Belleek mark is the R, the registration R in the upper element of the particular mark. There are other Belleek marks too. There's gold mark and black mark and green mark, and they all come from different time periods. It's not unlike other types of figurines or other types of ceramics that have one company working over long, long periods of times, decades and decades, and they have different marks of different colors and different types over time from the same company. This Belleek piece is green mark from 1965 to 1980 and value on it is $90. It's a really nice piece as well. So, did you pick the most valuable? How did you do? You got to test yourself. See how you do playing the game. I'm Dr. Lori. I'm always here with great tips for your thrift store shopping and selling online, and I hope to see you next time.